Gita Dhyana. O Bhagavad Gita, by which Arjuna was illumined by Lord Krishna himself, and which was composed of 18 chapters from within the Mahabharata by the ancient sage Vyasa. O Divine Mother, destroyer of rebirth, who showers the nectar of oneness upon us. O Bhagavad Gita, my affectionate mother, on thee I meditate. All the Upanishads are the cows. The milker is the cowherd boy, Krishna is the calf. And people of purified intellect are the drinkers. The milk is the supreme nectar of the Gita. My salutations to the Lord, who is the source of supreme bliss, whose grace makes the mute eloquent and the crippled cross mountains. Hari Om Tat Sat. Okay. I wanted to hear what how Swami Shivananda translates the title of this discourse. So he translates it as the yoga of the division between the divine and the demoniacal. So, okay, so we pick up here. We're at the summary of the chapter. So Lord Krishna will bring all of this back to the teaching, which we've been talking about. What is the lesson and what to catch from this? So, Shloka 22, whoever is good and does good. So the last shloka, do we remember the three gates to
hell?
To hell, yeah. Which were?
Greed.
Lust. Yeah.
Anger.
Very good. Perfect. That's exactly what Lord Krishna is sharing. So whoever is good and does good escapes from these three gates of darkness. Here he doesn't say hell again. He doesn't use that word again. So again, I'm not, here. We have word for word. Let's see what's being translated. Therefore, this should. We're not seeing the Sanskrit word exactly, but it's specific. Number 21, triple is the gate of hell, destructive of the self, lust, anger, and greed. And then 22, in the word for word, from these liberated, O Kanteya, gates to darkness. So you don't get a Sanskrit scholar with this. So. But we're noting the difference between the first Shloka 21 saying specifically gates to hell, and the second one saying darkness. So you catch the difference. Darkness is what? How do you speak of darkness?
Negative thoughts.
Connection.
Okay, so you said negative thought. You said
Like a disconnection from God. Like
very good. Very good.
We lost.
Okay, very good. And Shivadas, you said something as well.
I said it's absence of light.
Absence of light. Hari, darkness.
I cannot say. Anything selfish?
Ignorance. Ignorance. That's the whole symbolism of the blind king. In blind king. So it is not seeing, correct, but what do you see with? What is the instrument with which you see? It's not these.
It's this one.
The heart.
And it's not the intuition either, because the intuition is pure. You as a person come to see with what instrument? You see according to your own,
Capacity.
Respect.
okay, which is speaking of what?
Intellect.
That's very good. Yeah, there you go. So your capacity is determined by your nature of processing and dealing. And this is leading us into chapter 17, by the way, which is the yoga of the threefold faith. So, but when we speak of someone's nature, we're speaking of the choices that they make, correct? Because the choices that we make are the fruit, the nature is the fruit of the choices that we make. Yeah? So it is the intellect, isn't it?
Is intuition and intellect different then?
Of course. Intuition is always on. We were talking about, I shared the story about meat and fish. I've shared it a number of times. These are choices, right?
Big eye or
Yeah, the big eye is always on. Anytime I chose to ask that question, the answer was there. Anytime I chose to listen, the answer was there. But we don't necessarily want to hear it. We don't necessarily believe in it. We don't necessarily accept it. We don't necessarily identify with it. So, does that make sense? And we don't necessarily have time for it. Yes? But the intuition is always on. The light is never out. Yeah? So, yes, through intellect, you have the capacity to either follow the ego sense or to tune to the light, to the intuition, and take that as your guide. And any range in between. Yeah, so it can be part-time ego, part-time light, which would be pretty typical for us. Right? That's pretty typical for us. That's what's called the human birth. Mixed birth. Mixed birth. That's what it means, mixed birth. So, yeah. What's typical for us is that in this chapter, Lord Krishna is painting with a very clear brush the divine personage or personality, which is completely virtuous, right? And then painting the demoniacal personality or personage, which is completely dark, yes? And he's really painting the picture of the two as opposed to each other, right? But you see, we don't see it that way. We don't experience that way within us. We're not recognizing it yet. Yes? We're starting to. You're sharing some beautiful stories, in particular on Devi, about this, about recognizing it. And you as well, dear Narayana Das. Yeah. Yes? Yeah. So, and you see how sometimes it just feels good to honor that lower nature. Because sometimes anger feels good, doesn't it? Yeah.
Usually feels better than the self-hate or the pain.
Yeah.
It's a release to something is building up inside when you like yell.
Yeah. But then the intuition will give us a different way of dealing with it. So it's not easy. It's not easy. Still, pleasure and pain is such a strong impulse. What feels good is still a very strong impulse, even though we can identify that it's not beneficial. Right? So this is the situation we're dealing with from a practical matter. And these last 3 slokas, as well as the next, of course, 17, 18, help us with this. But But the personality is determined by the choices. And so this is speaking to the choices now, these last 3 slokas. Whoever is good and does good escapes from these 3 gates of darkness and instead rises to the supreme goal of life. And what we were talking about is this darkness is ignorance. So it literally, where the intellect is not subject to the light, that's what is darkness. There's no other darkness here. Does that make sense? Yeah. Because the darkness outside, the darkness or the light outside doesn't affect the intellect, correct? Interestingly enough, even the darkness around us, so we live in a very strange time with darkness being expressed a lot around us. Yeah? But does that actually affect the intellect? Only if we choose for it to. Right? Does the fact that someone else is angry actually affect your intellect?
No.
No. Only if you choose for it to. Otherwise, it's a test.
Maybe not the intellect, but the mind.
Yeah. But the intellect stands above the mind, Hari.
Right. Yeah.
The intellect is the master of the mind. So does it affect the intellect? And you see the answer is only if you choose for it to. And that's a statement about the intellect, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah. So otherwise, it's a test. We were talking about tests yesterday.
How to stay calm.
Yeah.
How to not give in.
So the teaching is such, I, Mr. Intellect, am going to stay in the light. And so what will happen right after I say that?
Something will come
You say that out loud?
Right. So darkness will appear.
Or the person that you're...
And now I have the opportunity, the ashram is this whole play. Also, the ashram's involved in this, isn't it? We know the story about rite of passage and all this for the ashram. And so it's just the same, isn't it? We say we're going to stand in the light. And so what will happen? Yes, that's exactly what it is. Someone appearing as this or that will say this or that. And then we get to choose. So this 22 is really speaking to this. It's a choice. It's not easy, but it's a choice. Whoever is good and does good escapes from these 3 gates of darkness. And the darkness and hell is equated as the same here. So hell is in this way not a place, although perhaps it exists as a place as well. Perhaps it exists as some realm. It's said to.
In the lower astrals.
Yeah, it's said to exist in this way. But really what we have experience with is it exists right here and right now when I'm caught up in negativity, when I'm caught up in limitations, when I'm caught up in judgment and all of this, then it's right here, right now, right? When I'm in this extreme state of anger and everybody's screwed up and all of this, then it's right here, right now.
Yeah, completely hopeless.
Sorry?
That feeling of completely hopelessness.
Yeah.
Definitely helps.
Time slows
it is
down.
hell. Yeah, it does. Time slows down. You see it. Very good. So, okay. And then one more warning from Lord Krishna in these last 2 shlokas, which is, but also a guidance, a beautiful guidance. But those who disregard the scriptural teachings and instead follow the impulse of their selfish desires do not attain to the supreme goal of life, nor true happiness, nor success. And then, in order to know what to do and what not to do, let the scripture be your guide. And when you understand the scriptural guidance, you will know how to live happily in this world. And when we understand it, and we honor it, we actually find it in the center. And the scripture is not different from the intuition. We won't find, when we have an understanding, real understanding of scripture, we won't find any daylight between scripture and intuition. And then the masters, they're living scriptures. There's a beautiful commentary on those last two here to share, and then we'll close out chapter 16. These last two, translated this way: he who acts under the impulse of desire, having cast aside the ordinances of the scriptures, attains not perfection nor happiness nor the supreme goal. And just another comment from here on scriptures. So the real teaching is in the center. The real teaching is in the intuition, because the teaching really adapts to the circumstance, but sometimes we'll see a master, for example, act in a way that we wouldn't have understood the scripture to say. But what the scripture does is it helps guide us towards the center, towards the intuition. It's like the rails, that if we submit to the rails, then we find the center in the center of the being. Therefore, let the scriptures be the authority in determining what ought to be done and what ought not to be done. Having known what is said in the ordinance of the scriptures, thou shouldst act here in this world. And then Swamiji adds this commentary. He says, Narada, in his Bhakti Sutras, declares that the saints, the supreme devotees of the Lord, invest scripture with authority. Scripture itself has the sage for its author, the sage for its model, and the sage as its goal. It is therefore reliable and serves not only as an indicator of the supreme goal, but as the only tangible trail, barring its living embodiment, the Guru. And Guru, of course, we were discussing yesterday, that which takes us from light to dark, and of course it's inside. But the challenge that we're dealing with, for all of us, if we recognize it or not, it's not just that we have to choose. It is that sometimes it's very difficult to recognize within us this Guru, because this intuitive guidance, sometimes it's very difficult to recognize it. And we can tell somebody just feel it, but until we actually have a context for that and recognize what it is we're feeling, because inside, without the experience and without the guidance, then the instinctive nature can be very easily misunderstood, especially when the intellect is still tainted by the notion that I'm this body. So as long as the intellect is still tainted, it's very, very difficult to recognize the difference between what's really good for me and what seems to be good for me. And the intuition will always guide towards what's good for me, but when it's difficult to recognize me, then it's very difficult still to understand that and to relate to it.
There's nothing to relate to.
Yeah. We're all coming from a place where me meant this. And so spade sounds really good. And it doesn't sound like anything negative would come from it. And so when we receive an inner guidance and this feels good to have a spa day, to pamper myself, pamper my body, everyone in the world will say, except for a few, will say, well, there's nothing wrong with that. Let's do it. So if you say to someone, go with what you feel, then be careful, because without the rails to help them to relate to what does that mean, and how do I recognize what's good? Peace Pilgrim would say like this. She would say, everything that you do, think, say, or do, because thought is doing, should lead to peace. And okay, great, that's high teaching. But what if we don't have the capacity yet to recognize what peace looks like? And how to determine, how to recognize what will lead me towards peace. Huh? It's a high teaching, but if I say that to someone, then they're in a difficult situation with a partner. Very difficult situation with a partner. Now, what will really lead towards peace is always to accept the other person as they are. But what we'll think will lead towards peace is to run away from the other person or make them leave.
I've done that.
Right?
Sometimes.
So, does that make sense? You understand what's being said, yeah? What we think will lead towards peace is pratyahara, full stop.
Yeah.
Right? But that won't actually lead to peace, not finally. It will help on the way. But then you have to come back out in the fullness, because otherwise you'll always have fear of someone doing something to you that's untoward. So you'll always want to pull in deeper and deeper and deeper until you're finally in an abscess. And that's hell. That abscess is hell. That abscess is a dark place, because now you've withdrawn completely from the scriptures, from love, from unity.
I guess the question is, how can one have absolute trust in the scriptures when we know that it's within the Maya? Because the scripture is in the Maya also.
Well, you have to trust in something.
It's about testing it yourself.
And then go for it and live it and see. We all have experience with trusting in our own mind. And then we go for it and we live it and we see. And that will take us to a point where finally we realize, but I can't trust myself. I can't trust my own mind.
Right.
And then you look around and say, well, then who can I trust? And then still it's a science experiment. Right?
Yeah.
Still it's a science experiment. So what's being shared, and this is consistent, every one of the masters, most of whom are clearly happy, and your goal is to be happy, right?
Right.
Yeah. So have a little more trust in them. And then you see.
But they're also within the Maya. It could be like a trick from the simulation.
Within the Maya, there is higher and lower. Is there not, Hari?
Yes.
Okay. What do you want to follow? Because you have to follow something. Do you want to follow the lower or the higher?
Higher.
Okay, there you go. It's also within the Maya. Pick the higher within Maya and let that lead you up until finally you're free of the Maya. It's a directional question.
Right.
Because if you pick the lower, clearly more suffering and more bondage.
All the scriptures are different, but are the same. Also, like you said.
Yeah, they're different depending upon the psyche and all of this, but they're the same because of what they're pointing to. And they're not technically complete and absolute truth, only silence is.
Right.
Yeah, but they're pointing at it, and the worldly stuff is pointing towards something different, which is more of the same.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's how. At some point, Swami had to make a choice. And we're always making a choice, is the thing. We're always making a choice. I made a choice to be completely open, to take all of the clothing off. I had to in order to walk pilgrimage. to submit myself completely and fully. And all I had to hold on to is Guru and Scripture. And from here, I'll tell you, there's an other side that you can come into. Where it's fine to be naked. It's fine, because you're not this body. And you're not even these desires and not even these thoughts. And the scriptural guidance will help guide you to that place. Help guide you to that place. It won't take you completely.
I see.
But it'll help guide you to that place where you recognize it's okay to be as you are. Like that. And it's just that. Where it's okay to be open. It's okay to be accepting. It's okay to be welcoming. It's okay to be in the light. Even the shadow is the light. It's okay to enjoy life, regardless of what's happening. It's okay to share. This is the place that we're being guided to.
And that's the promise from Krishna, I guess.
That's the promise from Krishna. We had an interesting conversation this morning before satsang with Ashira, and she noted that in the Mahabharata, in the close of the Mahabharata, only Yudhishthira actually achieves the Brahman consciousness. And Yudhishthira, the Bhagavad Gita doesn't deal with.
Right.
And so we had a very brief conversation about it. The Bhagavad Gita is really the teaching of light as taught to Arjuna. And Arjuna is dharmic. Arjuna is also a warrior. Arjuna is us, really. Arjuna loses himself at the beginning of it, just as we have so many times, right? And then she points out, and he doesn't reach the goal at the end. But then what we pointed out is, so what? This is what I said to her, so what? Because Lord Krishna assures us, and here's the discussion, the dialogue that underlies this. Follow me, I'll lead you out. And if you follow my guidance, Arjuna asks, will I be done? Will I be completely free? Lord says, if you follow my guidance, if you didn't complete in this birth, then I'll place you in the right womb for you to complete in the next one. So what's the difference? What's the big deal? We tend to get so mired and caught up that finally we're needing a voice that we can trust. And Scripture is the voice that we can trust. Now, will it fully take you absolutely all the way there? No. But it'll get you pretty darn close to where you have more clarity and more ability to see. So that's how we close. Let's read the close from the chapter. Thus, in the Upanishad of the glorious Bhagavad Gita, the science of the eternal, the scripture of yoga, the dialogue between Sri Krishna and Arjuna, ends the 16th discourse entitled The Yoga of the Division Between the Divine and the Demoniacal. Hari Om Tat Sat. And tomorrow morning we begin the yoga of the trifold faith. It's a very interesting chapter, 17. It'll really challenge some of our notions about faith and belief and all of that.
Because 18th chapter is in flow, correct?
18th chapter is the close. We're getting close.
And then are we going to start what is it?
Well, maybe the Ashtavakra Gita, that seems to be kind of in the lead, but we'll be open to suggestions then as we get close. Jagan Mata is pulling for Ashtavakra Gita. So, anyone joining us online, you can make suggestions too. We'll get a little we probably still have one with these two chapters. So, okay, let's close final prayers in RIT page 174. Okay, thank you. Om Trayambakam Yajamahe Sugandhim Pushtivardhanam Orvai Vakameva Bandhan Vitor Mukshiyamamritat Om Trayambakam Yajamahe Sugandhim Pushtivardhanam Orvai Vakameva Bandhan Vitor Mukshiyamamritat Om Trayambakam Yajamahe Sugandhim Pushtivardhanam Orvai Vakameva Bandhanan Mritor Mukshiyamamritat Om Sarvesham Swastir Bhavatu Sarvesham Shantir Bhavatu Sarvesham Purnam Bhavatu Sarvesham Mangalam Bhavatu Sarve bhavantu sukhinaha, sarve shantu niramaya, sarve bhadrani pasyanto, makashi dukhabhat bhave, asato ma satgamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityor ma amritam gamaya, om purnamida purnamidam purnat, Purnamudashyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vasishyate Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. O adorable Lord of mercy and love, salutations and prostrations unto Thee. Thou art omnipresent, omnipotent, and omniscient. Thou art Satchidananda. Thou art existence, knowledge, and bliss absolute. Thou art the indweller of all beings. Grant us an understanding heart, equal vision, balanced mind, faith, devotion, and wisdom. Grant us inner spiritual strength to resist temptation and to control the mind. Free us from egoism, lust, anger, greed, hatred, and jealousy. Fill our hearts with divine virtues. Let us behold Thee in all these names and forms. Let us serve Thee in all these names and forms. Let us ever remember Thee. Let us ever sing Thy glories. Let Thy name be ever on our lips. Let us abide in Thee forever and ever. Humble Satguru Shivananda Maharaj Ki, and for all of the saints and sages of all the traditions. Okay, let's rise for our tea.